when we're talking about an occupying power. And Israel, regarding the Palestinian territories, is precisely that. We see no point in supporting a document whose aim is solely one thing: to serve the geopolitical interests of one Security Council member that is not only not able to stop the escalation, but de facto is giving it a green light by linking acts of force and linking it to a number of toothless humanitarian conditions. We trust that the majority of our colleagues will act like us in the Security Council. Otherwise, as I already said, it would be a very serious blow to the Council's authority. In order for the UN Security Council to be able to carry out its mandate to ensure the maintenance of international peace and security, we have prepared a draft alternative resolution. It was compiled based on approved humanitarian language and the most useful elements from the American, Brazilian, and the first Russian draft. We see no reason why members of the Security Council would refuse to support it, because only if a cessation of violence or a ceasefire and a stopping of this new spiral of violence is something that doesn't fall in with their plans. This is last attempt of the Council is something that really is in line with its functions, and I would very much urge you not to miss this opportunity. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I shall first put to vote the draft resolution contained in document S/2023/792 submitted by the United States of America. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2023/792, please raise the hand. Okay. Votes, those against? Abstentions? Has not been approved. So the result of the voting is as follows: 10 votes in favor, 3 votes against, 2 votes abstention. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Security Council. Okay, now this one. Now I give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the permanent representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States is deeply disappointed that Russia and China vetoed this resolution. A resolution that, as I've said, was strong and it was balanced. That was the product of consultations with members of this council. We did listen to all of you. We incorporated feedback and we worked to forge consensus around a resolution that would send a clear message to the world, and most importantly, to Israelis and Palestinians, that this council is determined to meet this moment. Colleagues, we should not encourage Russia's cynical and irresponsible behavior by voting for its text, which was offered up at the very last minute, as I said earlier, with zero consultation, and which contains a number of problematic sections. Though today's vote was a setback, we must not be deterred. The United States stands by our text, and we stand ready to work with all member states to support the efforts of the Secretary General, President Biden, and Secretary Blinken, in cooperation with many countries around this table and in the region to build a more peaceful and secure future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of the United States for the statement, and now I give the floor to the permanent representative of China.
I thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, China voted against the draft resolution which has just been put to vote. This position is based on facts, based on law, and it is based on conscience and based on justice, and also based on the urgent cause of the entire world, in particular the Arab countries. We all recall that last Wednesday, a draft resolution focusing on the humanitarian situation in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, emphasizing the protection of civilians and supported by an overwhelming majority of council members, failed to be adopted because of a veto. On Saturday evening, the U.S. introduced a new draft text that set aside the consensus of the members and included many elements that were still deeply divisive and that went far beyond the humanitarian realm. Several members, including China, Russia, UAE, and Brazil, proposed amendments to the text. However, the proponent ignored the major concerns of all parties and made only cosmetic changes to the draft. And it was printed in blue in order to push the Council to vote on it. In terms of its content, the draft is seriously out of balance and confuses right and wrong. In terms of the approach, the draft was introduced in haste and lacked the consensus it deserved. In terms of its effectiveness, the draft does not reflect the world's strongest cause for a ceasefire, an end to the fighting, and it does not help to resolve the issue based on the above. The draft text is evidently not in a position to be adopted. Mr. President, China in no way opposes Council taking action. On the contrary, we have always strongly called for the Council to play a responsible role. What we oppose is that the draft resolution is evasive on the most urgent issue of ending the fighting, and that it has never been able to call for an immediate ceasefire in clear and in unambiguous terms. At this moment, ceasefire is not only a diplomatic term, it means the life and death of many civilians. If a resolution from the Security Council is ambiguous, issue of war and peace, it's irresponsible and it's also extremely dangerous. It's tantamount to paving the way for large-scale military action and giving the green light to further escalation of the war. China is by no means indifferent to acts that harm civilians. On the contrary, we strongly condemn at the first opportunity all violence and attacks against civilians and called for diplomatic efforts to promote the early release of the hostages. What we oppose is that the draft text does not call on the parties concerned to stop the indiscriminate and asymmetrical use of force, nor does it call for a thorough investigation into the heinous attack on the Al Ahli hospital. Such selective application of international law and double standards will only push more innocent civilians to the brink of death. China is by no means indifferent to the sufferings of the people in Gaza. On the contrary, we have always strongly called for the opening of relief corridors, ensuring humanitarian access and avoiding a humanitarian disaster. What we oppose is that the draft text selectively avoids referring to the root causes of the current humanitarian crisis in Gaza and fails to urge Israel to lift the full blockade of Gaza and to rescind the evacuation order for northern Gaza. Such an evasive approach is only will only accelerate Gaza's descent into an even greater humanitarian disaster. China is in no way denying Israel's security concerns. On the contrary, we have always strongly advocated that equal attention should be paid to the security concerns and legitimate rights of both Israel and Palestine. What we oppose is that the draft text attempt to establish a new narrative on the Palestinian-Israeli issue, ignoring the fact that the Palestinian territories have been occupied for a long time and evading the fundamental issue of independent statehood for the Palestinian people. It's worth being vigilant that the draft departs from the spirit of previous UN resolutions and embeds the dangerous logic of confrontation of civilizations and the justification of war and use of force. If the draft is adopted, it will completely dash the prospect for the realization of the two-state solution and plunge the Palestinian and Israeli peoples into a vicious cycle of hatred and confrontation. Based on the above, China will vote in favor of the draft resolution proposed by the Russian Federation. Mr. President, China has no selfish interest in on the question of Palestine. Any initiative that contributes to peace will receive China's staunch support. Any endeavor that facilitates Palestinian-Israeli reconciliation will be pursued by China with all-out efforts. Since the outbreak of the new round of conflict, China has actively advocated that the Council take meaningful action and make binding decisions on the Palestinian-Israeli situation as soon as possible. We also emphasize that the action and decisions of the Council must respect facts of history, take the right direction, and reflect due responsibilities and accountability so as to ensure that they stand the test of morality and conscience. We are ready to continue to work with members of the Council and the international community to play a constructive role in putting an end to the fighting, protect civilians, avert further humanitarian catastrophes, and realizing a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the question of Palestine. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the United States for their work and genuine efforts in narrowing as much as possible the differences in order to respond to the urgency of the situation on the ground. We welcomed a balanced draft which condemns the terrorist attack of Hamas and calls for the liberation of hostages, expresses sympathy for all innocent victims, reaffirms the right of states to self-defense in compliance with the obligations under international law, calls for the protection of civilians and for humanitarian pauses and humanitarian corridors to ensure unhindered humanitarian aid to those in need. It also welcomed the efforts of all regional and international actors to avoid a spillover and reaffirms the commitment for a political solution to the Middle East conflict. Albania deeply regrets the draft resolution was vetoed. Mr. President, we know perfection is the enemy of good. There are times when the urgency of the matter and the complexity of the issue ask for swift action, doing the best possible under the given circumstances, even though one would have liked and hoped for more. This draft was certainly one of those cases, because there is a time to draw a line in order to make actions matter, have the impact we are seeking. The US draft may not have been ideal. We supported it as an improved and reasonable way forward at this time, at this very particular moment, responding to critical issues and urgent needs as the best possible way to condemn terrorism and to respond to the urgency to protect civilians and ensure humanitarian aid on the ground. Therefore, we deeply, deeply regret that the Security Council was prevented to decide on a text that provides for the urgently needed humanitarian pauses and humanitarian corridors. Mr. President and colleagues, this veto will not help the people in Gaza. It will not help those taken hostages. It will not help humanitarian workers, and it will not make it easier for the UN on the ground. And while, as the Security Council proves unable to take the right decisions, we know the result. Hamas and other terrorist and extremist groups will feel empowered because there is no international agreed condemnation. There is no global sanction of the unacceptable. Mr. President, despite successive failures, we must not lose hope. We cannot renounce, because it is not only our job, it is our responsibility. We will continue to work in good faith to have the Council act on this critical issue in a balanced and fair manner, discharge its responsibilities, but also maintain its deeply affected credibility. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Albania for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Ecuador.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, members of the Security Council, we voted in favor of the draft resolution which we have just had before us. The text was introduced after a negotiating process in which many members of the Council participated. The draft contains elements of great urgency and relevance. For example, the draft reaffirms the obligation to respect and comply fully with all obligations under international law, international human rights law, international law on refugees, and international humanitarian law. The draft also requests that all measures necessary be adopted, including specifically humanitarian pauses, in order to allow for full, rapid, safe, unhindered humanitarian access, and to allow humanitarian and medical personnel through, and to make sure they are protected. The states have right to defend their population and to defend their country legitimately, and that should be stand alongside international law, and we saw that that was clearly pointed out in the draft. Mr. President, I'm convinced that each and every one of us, members of this Council, believe that the text could be improved upon. But I'm also fully convinced that we are not all going to agree on which part needs to be improved or how to do it. It will not help us to seek a perfect text when it's far too late or when it becomes irrelevant. As I pointed out last Wednesday, we are convinced that the Council must not remain silent in view of clear threats to international peace and security, and with increasingly worsening humanitarian consequences. And therefore, Mr. President, once again, we regret that less than a week afterwards, we are unable to arrive at a majority decision within the Council because of the use of the veto. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Ecuador for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Japan voted in favor of today's resolution proposed by the United States with the hope that it would help improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza and prevent further deterioration. It is therefore our deep regret that it was not adopted. We must ensure that humanitarian aid reaches those desperately in need, and this resolution would have taken measurable steps to these ends. In fact, this draft resolution contains many important and positive elements to address deteriorating humanitarian situations like never before in Gaza. We cannot agree with the argument that the draft resolution could be construed as something that gives green light to unlawful acts. Those who have any doubt on that, please read the draft resolution carefully yourself. We are grateful for the ongoing diplomatic outreach of key actors, including the United States, towards de-escalation. We also stress that civilian and humanitarian facilities must be protected in accordance with international humanitarian law by all parties. In conclusion, it is important that this Council remain engaged on this file and be ready to act whenever necessary. The world is counting on us. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of Japan for his statement. I shall now put to vote the draft resolution contained in document S/2023/795, submitted by the Russian Federation, the Republic of Sudan, and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2023/795 please raise their hands? Those against? Abstentions? How many abstentions? 2, 7, 8, 9. The result of the voting is as follows: 4 votes in favor, 2 votes against, 9 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted, having failed to obtain the required number of votes. Now I give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the permanent representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we regret the fact that the Security Council was not in a position to use yet another opportunity given to it to respond to the unprecedented crisis in the Middle East. The reason why we believe the US draft to be categorically unacceptable is something that I've already laid out in detail. It is very fortunate that members of the committee that have dug into their national positions were not brave enough to display strategic wisdom and support the Russian proposed text. Our Albanian colleague, who was astonished by the lack of condemnation for the terrorist attack, had an opportunity to correct that by voting in favor of our draft. But he clearly didn't read it carefully and didn't notice all the relevant parts of our text, and the inclusion of which he always emotionally talks about. We regret the fact that the Security Council did not meet the hopes pinned upon it. We sought to do everything we could to help this. Now, the challenge of preventing a further escalation in the area of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict stands with the GA. We support the draft resolution proposed by Jordan on behalf of the Arab group. Russia is one of its co-sponsors. We urge all member states to support that. Thank you very much.
I thank the permanent representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and now I give the floor to the permanent representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll keep this short because, frankly, it's not worth wasting any more time discussing Russia's bad faith resolution. Colleagues, the United States could not support yet another Russian resolution that was put forward with no consultation, that failed to reflect the realities on the ground. It is disappointing that Russia would rather try and score political points and further divide this Council than address the current urgent needs of Israelis and Palestinians. We all see that Russia is doing nothing to engage any of the relevant parties or support diplomatic efforts, including by the United Nations, to get more aid into Gaza. We'll say this again. The United States stands ready to work with all member states that are genuinely committed to advancing peace and security. We must put the interests of the region and the world above all else. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, the UAE's votes today were strictly on the merit of the draft resolutions submitted to this Council and how they tangibly respond to the dire situation in Gaza. We know what the most pressing humanitarian needs are. The UN and NGOs have been very clear. An immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the release of all hostages, safe, sustained, and at-scale humanitarian access, fuel for hospitals and desalination plants, water, and adherence to international humanitarian law. Yesterday, we heard dozens of statements imploring this Council to assign the same value to Palestinian life as it does to Israeli life. We cannot allow any equivocation on this point. There is no hierarchy of civilian lives. These must be the priorities of any resolution adopted by this Council. Furthermore, we cannot be silent on the question of forced displacement and the evacuation order. Crucially, the Gaza Strip is occupied territory. There should be no ambiguity about that. We still hope that forging consensus is possible, but clearly it will require more work. The stakes are too high. Civilians in Gaza cannot be abandoned. The Security Council must step up, as we have heard clearly from countless foreign ministers just yesterday, and that is the work that the UAE will turn to now. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of the United Arab for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Gabon voted in favor of the two draft resolutions introduced respectively by the United States delegation and the Russian delegation to express our support for the Palestinian and Israeli people, as well as our commitment to peace. It is that commitment to peace and the desire to protect civilians that led us to vote in favor of the resolutions introduced by Russia and then Brazil on the 16th and 18th of October. Through this vote, my country is reaffirming its support for any initiative allowing human lives to be saved in order to improve the fate of civilian populations and to ensure de-escalation. Those references appear in both draft resolutions which Gabon supported, namely condemning terrorist acts which took place by Hamas against the Israeli people on the 7th of October, the right to guarantee civilian people and civilian infrastructures as well as protect humanitarian workers. The important need for supply of goods is absolutely necessary for the civilians in Gaza. The requirement to immediately release without any conditions all hostages, our commitment to a peaceful solution to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as our commitment to a two-state solution. We regret that antagonism within this council and the lack of unity has meant that we are unable to arrive at a consensus text. We are aware of the fact that the texts put forward do not take on board all of our legitimate concerns, but Gabon feels that these draft resolutions contain elements which could make a difference on the ground, in particular on the humanitarian front. Acts of terror carried out on the 7th of October by Hamas led to a resumption of hostilities on a large scale on Israeli soil in Gaza and in occupied West Bank. All of the indiscriminate bombings which have followed have led to an escalation of violence, the repercussions of which have been dramatic on the civilian population and have destabilized the region, and they require a response from the Council. Once again, Gabon is calling upon all parties for restraint to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. Unfettered access, an end to forced displacement of people in Gaza, the opening of humanitarian corridors, the unconditional release of hostages will undoubtedly contribute to the calm that we all seek. We reiterate as well our call for a lifting of the blockade against Gaza and the cessation of hostilities, which would put an end to the despair that men, women, and children who are now facing as they stand before death. We support the Israeli victims, and it's crucial for those who are accountable for the acts carried out by Hamas to be brought to justice for their actions. We will continue to repeat it. The solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is political in nature. Diplomacy, negotiation, and dialogue are the only ways the international community has to ensure that the legitimate concerns of both parties are respected. Self-determination and the right to security and will guarantee peace and security for the Palestinian and Israeli people. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Gabon for her statement, and I give the floor to the permanent representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. We regret that the draft resolution proposed by the United States was not adopted. The text would have had a real impact on the ground by calling for hostages to be released, for aid to get in, including through humanitarian pauses. Through this resolution, the Security Council would have rightly and for the first time unequivocally condemned Hamas terrorist attacks. The United Kingdom could not support the resolution proposed by Russia, which once again failed to recognize Israel's right to self-defense. As so many of us have said, there is a grave crisis unfolding in the Middle East. The Russian text was put to a vote without a single minute of consultation with the Council members. It was not a serious attempt to have this Council speak with one voice. We are committed to continuing to work across the Council towards a balanced text that condemns Hamas, reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself, is clear on the need for everything to be done to protect civilians in line with international humanitarian law, and gets more aid flowing into Gaza. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of United Kingdom for her statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. We regret that once again the veto has been used to prevent the Council from shouldering its responsibilities in a critical situation that demands decisive action. The trajectory of the ongoing war between the State of Israel and Hamas is simply not sustainable and could engulf the entire region if we do not effectively mobilize as a Council. The civilian cost so far is unacceptable, and more human suffering would occur if we do not act. It is for this reason that we are deeply saddened by the Council's continuing inability to positively influence events on the ground by speaking in one voice to protect civilians and to stop the bloodshed. Indeed, Ghana had hoped that the US-sponsored draft resolution, which as a Council we had worked on over the weekend to improve the humanitarian language, including clear references to humanitarian pauses, could have garnered Council's support. While we supported the draft resolution, we still believe that the order for civilians and UN staff to evacuate all areas in Gaza, north of the Wadi Gaza, and relocate in southern Gaza need to be rescinded to save human lives. We thank the Russian Federation for their draft resolution. However, we would have wished for more time to consider the various proposals. In concluding, we reiterate our call for all efforts to be directed towards de-escalating the rising tensions and for our actions to be guided by humanitarian considerations, even in this difficult and tragic moment. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana for her statement, and now I give the floor to the permanent representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our efforts at this very juncture should be focused upon humanitarian problems that continue to deteriorate And from that viewpoint, Russian draft contains important elements. We note the incorporation of languages from drafts by Brazil and the US. At the same time, the Council, that has primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security, should refer to practical measures that could deter and prevent heinous terror attacks such as prevention of arms export or disrupting financing. We also think it is important for every member state I say, to recognize the right to defend itself and its people. Every member state, without distinction, has such right that has to be exercised in full compliance with international law. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Japan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Ecuador.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, as I said yesterday, this Council must not become an arena for rivalry among its members. On the contrary, it should be a space for reconciliation, peace, and international solidarity. The proposed decisions of this Council should be seen as tools which will contribute to achieving our collective goals. They must not be an end in themselves, much less should they become political or media trophies. The text of a resolution must be decided on through, or cannot rather be decided on simply by the will of a single member without allowing for any comments from others. Negotiations in good faith must be the basis for any output of this Council. Not to respect that principle would be creating a very dangerous precedent, and for that reason and for other reasons we voted to abstain. Thank you.
And representative of Ecuador for his statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. The situation in the Middle East requires unified, urgent action from the Council. We have all talked about this since the unjustifiable, shocking actions perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October against innocent Israeli civilians that we firmly condemn. The priority is to protect civilians, rapid, safe and unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza, the release immediately of hostage, and pressure to be exerted on the parties to prevent a spillover and regionalization of the conflict. We voted in favor of the US presented resolution because it represented, in our view, a first step taken by the Council towards achieving this, even if we call for clearer language, in particular on the protection of civilians. Switzerland abstained on the Russian presented text in the absence of a consultative process and a lack of desire to find consensus on the substance. Such a process would have enabled us to put forward alternative proposals on important parts and the way of mentioning the tragic events linked to the Al-Ali hospital. Switzerland recognises the legitimate desire for self-defence of Israel and deplores the loss of lives of thousands of civilians, including women and children, in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, and in particular in Gaza. It's regrettable that the Council, once again, has not been able to reach consensus and thus show its unity, given the existence of a crisis that may well spill over to the entire region. The lack of adoption of these resolutions is significant. However, Switzerland reiterates that the parties must respect IHL, and in particular regarding the conduct of hostilities, the principles of distinction, proportionality and precaution. Mr. President, the permanent members of the Council are using their veto right. They have this rather, and this gives them particular responsibility in the area of the maintenance of international peace and security. We do expect them to shoulder their responsibilities and to have a constructive, inclusive process. Switzerland remains available to support all efforts made by the members of the Council and their partners so that they can use their influence on the parties to bring a swift end to this conflict. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank the representative of Switzerland, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, as the Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs, Catherine Colonna, said before the Council, the situation in the Middle East is very dangerous. The conflict may well spill over, and the Council must therefore act and uphold its responsibilities. It must unambiguously condemn the Hamas terrorist attack against Israel. It must call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. And finally, it must call for the safe, unfettered access for humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza. This Council must also recall that Israel has the right to defend itself and duty to do so while respecting international law, in particular IHL. France calls for the establishment of a humanitarian pause which could lead to a ceasefire. It is absolutely essential for all civilians to be protected. It is for that reason that France voted in favor of the draft resolution put to a vote by the United States. France abstained on the draft resolution put forward by the Russian Federation because a number of important elements were lacking. In particular, this text did not qualify the Hamas attack as terrorist. Moreover, it was not open for negotiation, and we regret that fact. After the unfortunate failure today, France will continue, as it has always done, to be committed in good faith to ensure that this Council upholds its responsibilities. It is our collective duty to redesign a political horizon in order to meet the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. Hamas does not represent those people. The conditions for lasting peace are well known. These are absolutely essential guarantees for the security of Israel and a state for the Palestinians. That is the line that France will continue to defend and has always defended. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of France for his statement, and now I give the floor to the permanent representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the elected members of the Security Council, the E10. We regret that, yet again, this Council has not been able to exercise its mandate. Confronted by escalating conflict, a dire humanitarian situation, and the loss of civilian lives, our responsibilities remain clear and present. This Council is obliged to maintain international peace and security, and to do its utmost to safeguard the lives of civilians. We also call for the immediate and unconditional release of all remaining hostages. The E10 remains firm in its belief that we must urgently and genuinely address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, whose population is on the brink of calamity. Hundreds of thousands of civilians, including children, have been displaced. Thousands have been killed and injured. We cannot add to their suffering through our inability to find an agreement on a resolution that is desperately needed. Parties must allow aid in, as is their obligation under international law. We need to promote every and all mechanisms that can contribute to ensuring that assistance reaches all those in need throughout Gaza. Possible options include a humanitarian ceasefire, humanitarian pauses, and humanitarian corridors. We need to ensure the provision of essential goods and services at scale and sustained. This includes water, fuel, food, electricity, and medical supplies. We also recall that civilians are protected under international law and call for safe movement and the protection of civilian objects which are indispensable for the civilian population. While we welcome current efforts towards allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza through Rafah and commend all partners involved, we note that the current volume of aid is utterly limited when assessed with the actual needs of the population. This crisis is also gripped by a growing risk of regional spillover. This demands our undivided attention. We must mitigate such risks through urging all parties to exercise restraint, de-escalate, and to respect the norms of international law. It is for this reason that in the coming days, the E10 will be working on a new proposal. As elected members of this Council, we also represent the international community, and we have a duty and an obligation to act. There is no time to waste. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Malta, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by deeply thanking the United States and every other member of this Council that supported this resolution. Voting for a resolution that clearly condemns savage genocidal terrorists while standing up for member states' right to defend itself against terror shows that despite all of the libelous falsehoods spread in the UN's halls, there are still those who stand up for the values of freedom and security. I thank you for your moral clarity in such dark times. To those who voted against this resolution, I must say that your decision shocks me to my core. In Israel, we are fighting for our very survival. My elderly parents living in Ashkelon have spent the last 20 days running back and forth to their bomb shelters as rockets rain down on them, deliberately on them, on civilians. And you cannot condemn even these deliberate attacks on civilians perpetrated by terror organizations? If any of your countries endured a similar massacre, I am certain that you would act with much greater force than Israel. Much greater force. There would be no question in your minds that such a barbaric slaughter requires a broad military operation against the terrorists who committed such inhumane atrocities to eradicate their terrorist capabilities in order to make sure that such atrocities can never happen again. How would Moscow react if terrorist death squads wiped out entire neighborhoods in Moscow? How would Beijing respond if genocidal jihadists beheaded and murdered your babies? I will give you a moment to reflect on that thought. But I believe every person, not only here in this room, across the globe, whoever is watching this discussion, knows exactly how you would respond. So we don't need a moment to reflect. Should the Security Council not condemn the terrorists and their crimes against your innocent civilians, each of you would be just as shaken as I am. You would feel that there is a blatant double standard and that the international community is blind to your agony and that the Council isn't taking even the most basic steps that anyone with a slight moral compass should take. This is precisely how the state of Israel feels right now. Those who have voted against the US-led resolution have shown the world that this Council is incapable of doing the most basic task of condemning ISIS-like terrorists and cannot confirm the right to self-defense of the victim of these heinous crimes. Israel has been attacked, condemning ISIS-like terrorists and cannot confirm the right to self-defense of the victim of these heinous crimes. Israel has been attacked and continues to be attacked. This is a fact. In the south from Hamas and in the north from Hezbollah. What a surprise. Meanwhile, the other resolution, the Russian resolution voted upon today, sought to tie Israel's hands, preventing us from eliminating a threat to our existence and permitting the genocidal terrorists to regroup so they can massacre us again. The absurdity to call on Israel to rescind the call for temporary evacuation is truly unbelievable and goes against every value that this council represents. By demanding Israel to call on Gazans to return north, the resolution only serves to maximize civilian casualties, not mitigate them. Why would Israel ask Gazans to return to an active war zone? We cherish life and take every measure to minimize civilian fatalities, casualties. We are not fighting the Palestinians. We are fighting only the Hamas ISIS terrorists. Civilians should never be deliberately put in harm's way. Furthermore, the alternative resolution, the Russian resolution, makes no mention of our right to self-defense, nor does it mention Hezbollah, the terrorist force on Israel's northern border that has spent the past weeks firing rockets without any reason, mortars and anti-tank missiles at Israeli towns and cities. Would Moscow or Beijing be given a right to self-defense if faced with the same threat? I believe so. Finally, if this other resolution truly focused on the humanitarian situation, as it was presented in the first time, the over 220 hostages being held by Hamas would not be a general side note at the very end of the resolution. It would be the first demand. The hostages held by Hamas must be the top humanitarian priority of the international community. Their well-being should come before aiding the supporters of the terrorists who abducted them. Before. Despite the wording of the Russian resolution, there can never be any false immoral comparisons between the Hamas savages and the law-abiding democracy of Israel. Israel is fighting sheer evil, and this should be crystal clear to every person in this room. Hamas has perpetrated the most barbaric massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Hamas is solely responsible for the Palestinians' situation in Gaza. Hamas is committing crimes against humanity. In the wake of the Holocaust, we collectively swore never again. This was one of the main reasons the UN was established. Never again, dear colleagues, is now. Do not forget this. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of Israel for his statement. The permanent representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor.
Господин председатель, я бы хотел сказать несколько слов.
A few words to respond to what has just been said by the PR of Israel. The PR of Israel put a rhetorical question. What would Moscow do if there were terrorist attacks on the Russian Federation? The response to this question is very clear. Russia has encountered international terrorism, for example, during what happened in Chechnya at the end of the 1990s, beginning of 2000s. Then, many people sitting here in this chamber told us that we were not encountering international terrorism, but with a national liberation movement, and urged us to talk to the Chechens. We talked to the Chechens then, but we didn't talk to the terrorists, we destroyed them. Just as well, we, when the terrorists took a hospital in Budionnovsk, we eradicated them there. In Dubrovka, where they took the cinema, and then in Beslan, where they killed innocent children. I'd like to draw your attention to what the PR said. I'd like to draw you to the fact in our statements, in our resolutions, there is a condemnation of terrorism and expressions of sympathy with the rightful rage of Israel regarding the deaths of its civilians. We now are encountering terrorist acts as well. And we don't talk to terrorists, we talk to the Chechens. And as a result, Chechen is now a peaceful Russian republic that is an integral part of the Russian Federation. And the Chechens are indeed in the special military operation of Russia and are fully in the army. That is what it means to talk to the people, but we don't talk to terrorists. And so we're not asking you to reject a fight with terrorism, but rather to fight terrorism, to fight terrorists and not to fight civilians. So we're not in any way denying Israel's right to protect itself from terrorist attacks. Please, could you bear that in mind when you decide to comment on our statements in the future? Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. The permanent representative of China has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give the permanent representative of China the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be very brief. I only wanted to say, my distinguished PR of Israel, having a debate with Israel was not my intention. That Israel treats China as a rival, you've picked the wrong target, probably. You should be aware that from the very start of this round of conflict between Palestine and Israel, China has unequivocally condemned all acts that harm civilians in violation of international law. When we refer to civilians, they include both Palestinian civilians and those of Israel. Second, regarding today's resolutions, you made some comments. I'd like to remind you that just last week, this council, there was a resolution before the council which contained elements that condemned Hamas attacks. China voted in favor of that resolution. However, that resolution was vetoed. Third, in my earlier statement, I made it abundantly clear.
是否认以色列的安全关切，相反，我们一直主张同等
legitimate concerns. However, we emphasize equal attention to the legitimate security concerns and legitimate rights of both Palestine and Israel in the current circumstances. When we try to deal properly with this round of the conflict between Palestine and Israel, we cannot deny that the rights of the Palestinian people have for a very long time not been properly guaranteed. And the only way out, we believe, is the two-state solution. But that has not been properly settled. So let's be frank, let's be honest, face up to facts, and put aside differences and join forces to handle well the prevailing issues and also to chart a path whereby both Palestinians and Israelis can live in harmony, tranquility, peace, and happiness. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of China for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
أخي محمود سفير المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية ورئيس المجموعة العربية لهذا الشهر. ونحن في هذا الصدد نحيي الأمين العام على موقفه الشجاع والمبدئي وعلى سلوكه المبدئي بالوقوف خارج معبر رفح ينادي من أجل مفتح المعبر وهدنة إنسانية لإنقاذ حياة ملايين الفلسطينيين في غزة. إن هذا الموقف الشجاع الذي عبر عنه بالرغم من تخرصات البعض الذين لا يستطيعوا أن يرقوا إلى مستوى موقفه المبدئي والأخلاقي، فنحن نحييه. وكما قلت باللغة الإنجليزية أصبح أكثر شعبية من أي شخص آخر في فلسطين، في غزة، في كل الدول العربية وربما في كل أركان الكرة الأرضية. أمين عام يدافع عن المبادئ وعن حقوق الإنسان وعن القانون الدولي بموقف شجاع ومبدئي هو الأمين العام الذي تحتاجه الأمم المتحدة والذي يستطيع أن يدافع عن النظام المتعدد الأطراف الذي ترمز له الأمم المتحدة. فنحن نحييه ونشكرها على هذه المبادئ ونقف معه دون تردد من الذين يتطاولوا عليه ولا يحق لهم أن يفعلوا ذلك، وهم معزولين في هذا الشأن لوحدهم، لأن العالم كله يقدر ويحترم هذا الرجل المبدئي. وشكرا جزيلا ويعطيكم العافية.
سعادة السفير، سؤال سريع حول السفيرة. لا
If we are taking questions, she is before you.
Thank you very much. So, Carrie Norton from Le Monde and RFI. Yesterday, you, with the representative of 22 Arab states, delivered a very reasonable and authentic message, right? You say that the international community failed for the peace for all Palestinian people and all Israeli people. In the resolution you're planning to present tomorrow, there's no mention of the attack by Hamas on October 7th. Are you planning, because you're calling more countries to co-sponsor this resolution, are you planning to change, to amend this resolution, to integrate this reference to the the attack made by Hamas?
We circulated our draft resolution and we will look at all comments and suggestions, but we decided to remain focused on the humanitarian aspect of that draft resolution. The position of the Arabs was reflected yesterday by the foreign ministers, and they responded to that question, and our position was declared in a ministerial meeting in Cairo, in which we stand against harming or killing any innocent civilians, all the civilians from all sides. عندك سؤال يا اوكي ثانك يو.
سعادة السفير، السفيرة مالطا, or I will pose it in English for other colleagues. The ambassador of Malta, before she went to the Security Council, she said that Malta will try to work on a draft resolution in case today the two resolution will not be adopted. My question is, they will try to work on a draft resolution with the E10 to have a compromise between the Russian and the American resolution. My question is, to which extent the Arab League and Palestine support such an effort, and what do you want to see there? Thank you.
I thought you wanted to ask your question in Arabic, but since you asked it in English, I'll respond to you in English. We listened to the statement of the ambassador of Malta, who said that she spoke on behalf of the E10. It was a statement. There is no specific proposals or anything evolving into a draft resolution. I think that once we see a draft resolution and we are asked to comment on it, we will do that, but we are not there yet. Thank you very much.
What do you propose as the solution to this chaos? You have a solution? Saving lives.
The 9,452nd meeting of the Security Council is resumed. I wish to remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 4 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. Flashing lights on the colors of the microphones will prompt the speakers to bring their remarks to a close after 4 minutes. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Keisal Peters, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I begin by congratulating the government of Brazil for its exemplary leadership and unyielding stewardship during the month of October and during a time of great upheaval and grave uncertainty. I also thank our distinguished briefers for their presentations. St. Vincent and the Grenadines welcomes the convening of this open debate on women's participation in international peace and security, bearing in mind more specifically the increased number of conflicts and the most recent outbreak of hostilities in Israel and Gaza. Mr. President, our thoughts are with all those who have suffered the unbearable consequences of war, especially the women and children who, as always, are paying the heavy price of armed conflict settings and also make up the vast majority of displaced persons. At this moment, women and children already account for more than 60% of the casualties in the current war in the Middle East, and we know that will increase if we are unable to facilitate a ceasefire. In this regard, St. Vincent and the Grenadines calls for an immediate cessation of hostilities on all sides and for a quest to embark on a just and lasting peace in accordance with the principles and provisions of Resolution 242. The international community must intervene justly and mercifully to bring hostilities to an end and to ensure that international humanitarian law is upheld in Gaza for the sake of humanity. Mr. President, as we commemorate the 23rd anniversary of Resolution 1325, let us be mindful that the primary objectives of the UN Charter are to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, and to promote social progress and better stares of life in larger freedom. The 4 pillars of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, under the banners of participation, protection, prevention, relief, and recovery, allow for an elaboration of, yet targeted approach to, these timeless principles. Today, we take a moment to contemplate the progress we have made as a global community and the obstacles that still lie ahead. But we do so especially mindful of the women and children in the conflict-affected countries. We do so, too, with a profound sense of urgency of the necessity to ensure that our tools are fit for purpose. We do so now with the determination to redouble our efforts in putting them to good use. We remain cognizant that women constitute approximately half of the global population, including those residing in conflict-affected countries and regions. So we must ensure that solutions to and the prevention of conflicts are durable and inclusive. We offer these 3 points of emphasis. First, despite the adoption of Resolution 1325 over 2 decades ago, women's participation in international peace and security processes, including those led by the United Nations, remain unacceptably low. Mr. President, it is high time that we take substantive and meaningful action to address this issue and ensure the full, equal, meaningful, and active participation of women in all peace processes. Secondly, UN political and peacekeeping missions play a critical role in building capacity. To achieve the women, peace, and security goal of equal participation of diverse women at every stage of peace processes, all UN-led organs and agencies must consistently apply gender analysis. The UN must demonstrate political will by providing financial and technical support and building national capacity to enhance women's participation. By doing so, every aspect of UN-led peace processes can ensure gender parity and justice at every stage. Thirdly, women must be given equal opportunities to lead and participate in peace efforts. This includes being part of negotiations, acting as mediators, and signing peace agreements. Mr. President, women must also be involved in monitoring peace agreements, transitional authorities, and all other political and economic processes related to building and sustaining peace. Mr. President, in closing, it is undeniable that sustainable peace cannot be achieved while women are targeted in war and excluded from peace negotiations. Women's participation and empowerment are essential to resolving conflicts and building lasting peace. It cannot be overstated that the inclusion of women in the peace process is non-negotiable if we are to have any hope of creating a peaceful future. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency Mrs. Peter for her statement. And I give now the floor to His Excellency Mario Adolfo Bucaro Flores, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Guatemala is grateful to Brazil in its quality as President of the Security Council for October for convening this open debate on the historic resolution on women, peace, and security, Resolution 1325. This meeting is taking place in a context of global escalation of conflicts, including the atrocious attacks by Hamas against the State of Israel, which Guatemala firmly condemns. My delegation is also grateful for the briefings provided, in particular the briefing by the President of the ICRC, who for the first time since 1947 is a woman. The adoption of Resolution 1325 is a landmark in our efforts towards global peace and security. It is the first resolution which recognizes the key role of women in building peace, preventing and resolving conflicts, as well as the differentiated impact that conflicts have on women and girls. This resolution inspired the international community to adopt clear-cut measures to promote gender equality in areas affected by conflict. It has led to 9 subsequent resolutions and frameworks, as well as a complete array of efforts which have evolved to include women in peace and security initiatives. I would highlight the following contributions. It has shed light on gender-based violence, which tends to happen in conflicts. It's promoted measures to protect women and girls from sexual violence in these areas. It's improved the understanding of the specific needs of women and girls in a humanitarian context, which has led to the provision of support and different types of support and rehabilitation to survivors. The drafting of 95 national plans of action in Guatemala have now been adopted. I would say that Guatemala is the 8th Latin American country and the 2nd Central American country to have drafted a national plan of action in 2017. It has an annual roadmap for implementation, and it is proof of the state's commitment to promoting action for the global agenda of women, peace, and security. Guatemala has ratified a number of international conventions to shoulder our legal responsibility to protect people and their fundamental rights. The protection and promotion of women's human rights by the state of Guatemala is based primarily on the CEDAW Convention on the Beijing Platform of Action and the SDGs. I would also underscore the fact, Mr. President, that today we are committed to involving women in peacekeeping operations, and we recognize the need to increase the number of women. So far, Guatemala has deployed 372 women. 22 have participated as military observers, 6 as staff officials, 158 in the military police contingent in Haiti, and 186 in the Special Forces contingent in the DRC. Mr. President, at this 23rd anniversary of the adoption of this resolution, we recognize progress achieved by member states as well as the challenges ahead. We must prioritize the needs of women in conflict and post-conflict situations. We must bring those individuals, either perpetrators or masterminds of violence against women, to justice. We must make sure there are economic opportunities for women who have become victims. To achieve sustainable peace, we need the full and meaningful participation of women in the decision-making process and in peace building. We encourage this Council to continue to take the necessary steps to promote Resolution 1325 and to implement it in practice effectively. All member states of this organization must continue to promote and protect the rights and needs of women in conflict situations, and together we hope to see progress before we celebrate the 25th anniversary of this historic resolution. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Bucaro Flores for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Lord Vaea, Minister of Internal Affairs of Tonga.
Mr. President, I wish to congratulate Your Excellency for taking the chair. And I am pleased to address the Security Council for the first time on the anniversary of the landmark United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on the theme Women's Participation in International Peace and Security from Theory to Practice. Peace and security for Tonga means the security of the people from a variety of widespread and cross-cutting challenges to the survival, livelihood, and dignity of the people. The impact of intersecting crises of climate change, COVID, disasters, including the volcanic eruption of January 15, 2022 in Tonga, creates a variety of insecurities that we are, as a community of people, must address. The adoption by Pacific leaders of the Boe Declaration in 2018 and the 2050 strategy for a blue Pacific continent recognizes a comprehensive approach to security. Tonga's national women empowerment and gender policy, as well as the Pacific Platform for Action for Gender Equality and Women's Rights, further create an enabling environment for mainstreaming gender across government policies, programs and services, including budget allocations, aligns well with the goals of a women's mediators networks. We propose for the United Nations Security Council to support climate change to include increased collaboration with the Peace Building Commission, other intergovernmental entities, the United Nations system, and civil society to better support conflict prevention efforts. The appointment of a special representative of the Secretary General on Climate and Security and the deployment of a dedicated staff, such as the Climate Security Advisors. leveraging existing mechanisms such as the Climate Security Mechanism, integrating climate data in early warning system and other data and reporting tools, including regular reporting to the United Nations Secretary General, to the United Nations Security Council, incorporating climate risks in mandates of peacekeeping and special political missions, and encouraging climate-informed mediation, peacekeeping initiatives, and peace operations, among others. In conclusion, we look forward to continuous engagement with member states, civil society, and development partners in addressing comprehensive crisis facing the Pacific in our own way, that translate and build on our community and traditional ties. And may we translate women's participation in international peace and security from theory to practice. Mr. Chairman, I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Vaya for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad of Algeria.
Mr. President, my delegation thanks you for convening this debate and allowing us the opportunity to discuss women, peace, and security, which is a topic that my country has included among its top priorities for our next membership and mandate in this council. 23 years have passed since this council has adopted the historic resolution 1325, which has enshrined the international community's recognition of the pivotal and vital role of women, in particular in the prevention and mitigation of conflicts, and in many cases, and in most cases, in developing peaceful settlements and sustainable settlements. In this context, my delegation welcomes the progress achieved in implementing the provisions of this important resolution, in particular, as they relate to including the Women, Peace and Security agenda increasingly in the work of our United Nations and its different subsidiary organs on both the regional and national levels as well. For Algeria, and affirming the statement of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, during the high-level week of the General Assembly last September, my country has adopted last July a national action plan in order to contribute to the achievement of the purposes of this Security Council resolution that aims to promote the status of women in peace processes and security, and women's effective role in achieving peace everywhere, at all times, and under all circumstances. Algeria proudly celebrates the contributions of its free women who have participated in all important moments of Algeria's history, starting from the period of struggle against colonization through the period of building a sovereign state and until the current stage, and addressing the challenges in order to consolidate the rule of law and to promote economic development and advance social welfare. There is no doubt that the adoption of our National Action Plan that aims to implement Resolution 1325 as stipulated in the fourth recommendation of the UN Secretary General's most recent report on the topic will highly affect this trend and will consolidate the gains achieved by Algeria in this context, in particular as it relates to the following. One, promoting the recruitment of women in the security and military sectors in order to achieve their effective participation in the maintenance of security and stability. Second, supporting the appointment and promotion of women in leadership positions in security sectors. Third, increasing awareness of women and men of the importance of women's participation in the security sector. Fourth, promoting the participation of women in the different national institutions as well as regional and international as related to peace and security. Fifth, training leading staff members of women in security and military fields on the skills for negotiation and conflict management in order to participate in the regional international operations to preserve peace. Six, in developing a database of the qualified and experienced women in the area of negotiation and peacekeeping. Seventh, and finally, through including women active in civil society. Mr. President, Algeria, as other nations, is not immune from the implications imposed by regional and international developments. In particular, what is witnessed in El Sahel, where we witness an unprecedented crisis because of the increase and extension of hot pockets and crises and conflicts threatening peace and security and stability from the Red Sea to the Atlantic. Accordingly, the action plan adopted in my country through its main three pillars, participation, prevention, and protection, represents a proactive strategy and preventive strategy that aims to advance the status of women in society and through recognizing women's role in the area of peace and security, in particular through supporting women's participation in negotiation and peacekeeping operations and peace building in a sustained manner. In conclusion, I pay tribute to Palestinian women for their resilience in the face of the brutal aggression of the Israeli occupation against the Gaza Strip under blockade. We salute their resilience in the face of all plots being sown against the Palestinian question. And I also pay tribute to the resilience of Sahrawi women in defending the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. And from me personally, I would like to express admiration and respect and appreciation for all the free men and women of the world for the sacrifices they offer and the burden they carry in order to leave their impact and effect within their circles in order to establish peace and security and stability. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf for his statement, and I'll give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Elizabeth Taylor-Jay, Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs of Colombia.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Distinguished delegates, excellencies, 1 year after having announced to the world the onset of our participatory process to draft Colombia's first national action plan for the implementation of Resolution 1325, we have come to you to tell you about the revolutionary history that we are weaving as we build peace in our country. And this peace is only possible with women in all their diversity. In Colombia, after 70 years of armed conflict, total peace promoted by President Gustavo Petro is a national priority, and it is a necessary precondition. In order to achieve it, we must ensure the participation of women as they build this peace. We cannot deny that war has permeated their very being. It has changed their life plans. It's transformed their realities. It has marginalized them. And it is for that reason that the Women, Peace and Security agenda is something that we see as a necessary tool to defend women's diversity and women's lives. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, we are very proud of the work done over the past year after more than 2 decades where the women of our country were walking alone without the support of the state to put forward Agenda 1325. Today we are changing that reality. We are pleased to announce that we have finalized a lengthy participatory process in drafting our national plan of action. More than 1,500 women in all their diversity in 20 different fora told us about their experiences, shared their stories, and they shared their vision about the future. Some countries have underscored my country's efforts. Undoubtedly, we see this as a milestone and a legacy we leave to the rest of the world. I would highlight with pride the work I've done with women, Afro-descendant women, Black women, Raíces and Palenquera women, indigenous, lesbians, bisexuals, trans, queer, rural women, peasants, the signers of the peace agreement. In 2016, those who lived on the borders of our country, women with disabilities, and women who'd been deprived of their freedom. Through meetings at the grassroots level, we listened to women who had lived in areas where the armed conflict was most present. We approved the themes of our plans, and we listened to them to draft recommendations to be implemented at the grassroots level. We established a national forum bringing together more than 230 female leaders. In alliance with our institutions, we are now defining the indicators and the budget which will facilitate implementation in the short, medium, and long term. And moreover, over time, we will measure the real impact on the lives of all Colombian women through a monitoring and control follow-up mechanism in each of the territories. This process, per se, is proof of the immeasurable power of political participation and the empowerment of all women in our country. But we did not achieve this alone. A feat of such caliber has only been possible thanks to the constant and decisive support of UN Women and other organizations and UN agencies, the OAS, and countries such as Sweden, Norway, Ireland, Canada, Switzerland, the UK, and the United States. Excellencies, our heroines are the women of our country, living in their territories in the far reaches of Colombia, women in all their diversity who have stood together to protect their rights. Thanks to this shared work, the work of Colombian women's organizations, We are really changing our country. Today, the gender approach, the voices, the experiences, and the impact of women, of female youth, of girls is cross-cutting through all of the peace processes and discussions taking place in Colombia. I have come here today to invite you to breathe new life into the work of this council. Our own experience is proof that the peace and security agenda requires, even demands, a gender approach, a cross-cutting approach, a territorial and a human approach in order to be truly effective. In Colombia, we are convinced that the time has come to look to new horizons, to meet current challenges, to understand security from a human security standpoint with a gender perspective, and I invite you to see the resilience of women in all of their diversity and use that as the basis for building total peace in the world, which we desire and need so much. Thank you.
See Ms. Elizabeth Taylor-Jay for her statement. And I'll give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Sanja Stiglic, State Secretary for Political and Multilateral Affairs and Development Cooperation of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Brazil for organizing today's debate and briefers for their valuable contribution. Council's Resolution 1325 did much more than recognize the vital contribution of women in peace and security. Together with succeeding resolutions, it set up a strong normative framework to increase the participation of women and incorporate gender perspectives in all peace and security efforts of the UN. The world has changed since then, regrettably not for the better. Violent conflicts are raging around the globe at the highest rate since the Second World War. The number of women and girls living in conflict-affected regions has risen by staggering 50% since 2017. The current dire situation in the Middle East will only further exacerbate these numbers. In all conflict situations, we call for full respect of international law. We are not on track to achieve the SDG 5 by 2030, and we know that conflicts amplify the existing inequalities and disproportionately affect women and girls by food insecurity, displacement, sexual and gender-based violence, human trafficking, and disrupted access to health care, among others. Slovenia will respond to these challenges by increasing the share of its development assistance for gender equality and women's empowerment to 85% by 2030, in line with our feminist foreign policy approach. Even though current situation does not give us many reasons for optimism, we must forge ahead, and we have seen some progress when it comes to accountability. And there are positive trends in peacekeeping. In this respect, we welcome progress of Department of Peace Operations on achieving targets of the Uniform Gender Parity Strategy and encourage further efforts on gender parity in military contingents. Mr. President, Women, Peace and Security Agenda can only be realized with a strong political support and partnership with all relevant stakeholders, including regional organizations, civil society organizations, and peace builders. Participation remains one of its key components. We are far from achieving the goal of full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in peace and other processes. Inclusive processes are key for ending conflicts and creating a lasting peace. United Nations, including this Security Council, must lead by example. It needs to include gender dimension issues in its work more systematically. This includes all relevant country and thematic consultations. New mandates or mandates renewals should include gender-specific provisions. As recent decisions in this room show, there is space for improvement also in the Council's work on sanctions, especially by including sexual violence as a designation criterion. We commend the increase in women briefers in the recent years. We strongly condemn any attempts to intimidate and silence them. They must be able to return to their homes and their work safely. The United Nations and member states must work to prevent and address any retaliatory measures against them or their family members. We commend the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund for work in this area. and Slovenia will continue to support fund's activities. Mr. President, on 1st of January 2024, Slovenia will become a member of the Security Council. For the second time, we will serve with the same dedication and the same sense of urgency as a voice in support of the half of the world's population that is left behind. Slovenia will join the shared commitments on women, peace and security, and looks forward to working with partners on strengthening implementation on all aspects of the WPS agenda. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Sanja Stiglik for her statement, and now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Irina Mudra, Deputy Minister of Justice of Ukraine.
Mr. President, we thank Brazil Presidency for calling this open debate and thank all briefers for their comprehensive presentations. Delegation of Ukraine aligns with the statement delivered by the group of Friends of Women, Peace and Security, and statement on behalf of the European Union, and we would like to make a few remarks in our national capacity. Today's event marks the anniversary of the adoption of the UN Resolution 1325, aimed at promoting women's access to decision-making positions so that women can play their role as agents of change in security and defense structures. As an elected Security Council member for 2000-2001, Ukraine was involved in the preparation and adoption of 1325 resolution, and as a state remains committed to its promotion, including relevant supplemental resolutions. Ukraine is implementing the second National Action Plan for the Resolution 1325, amended and updated in December 2022, to address current needs, also taking into account the full-scale Russian aggression. The current updated National Action Plan recognizes that women in Ukraine must be actors and agents in the ongoing war, as well as in the recovery and reconstruction of the country. For our country, the topic of today's discussion is of paramount importance amidst devastating gender-related consequences of the ongoing Russian armed aggression against Ukraine. Throughout our repeated calls for the full respect of the United Nations Charter and international law, Ukraine has sought to place victims and survivors at the heart of all efforts, and ensuring survivors non-discriminatory and comprehensive access to essential services, including sexual and reproductive health care services and mental health and psychological services, as well as to gender-responsive justice. Such decisions were not arrived at by chance. Over 60,000 Ukrainian women are currently defending against Russia's aggression as part of the Ukrainian military. Ukraine has also increased a number of women who are part of Ukraine's cabinet of ministers. A platform on gender mainstreaming and inclusion during recovery that ensures the inclusion of the principle of gender equality in the process of recovery of Ukraine and provides for better coordination between executive authorities and other relevant actors such as civil society, business representatives, has been adopted. As the group of Friends of Women, Peace and Security gathers to reaffirm the importance of Resolution 1325 in preparation for its 25th year in 2025, we agree on the need to set goals for specific commitments. It is important that we unite in our call for ever-increasing gender equality and women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in political and public life. This must remain fundamental to our common goal of lasting international peace and security, as called for in the Secretary General's new Agenda for Peace. To that end, we urge all member states to continue to protect and promote women's human rights and ensure the full, equal, and meaningful and safe participation and leadership of women in all aspects of peace and security with a target of 50%. Support to women organizations and activists is critical in this regard. In conjunction with this target must be the effective prevention and response to all forms of sexual and gender-based violence and discrimination. At the Nairobi Summit on International Conference on Population and Development 25, Ukraine pledged to end gender-based violence and to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women and girls by the year 2030. Towards achieving this goal, the government of Ukraine has since criminalized domestic violence, formed special police units trained to address situations of domestic violence, introduced the practice of emergency protection orders and shelters, and criminalized the failure to comply with such orders. After the occupation of a number of territories of Ukraine, we were faced with massive atrocities, including rapes and other forms of conflict-related sexual violence committed by Russian military against the civilians. At this stage, it is impossible to find out how many Ukrainians have been subjected to these brutal crimes, given that these violations are barely reported. The first cases of sexual violence committed by Russian soldiers against Ukrainian women, girls, men, and boys were recorded there, as documented by the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine and the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. To address prevent conflict-related sexual violence, the framework of cooperation between the government of Ukraine and the United Nations was signed. Ukraine became the first country to launch an all-encompassing coordination mechanism to combat conflict-related sexual violence. We also adopted a detailed implementation plan involving state institutions, civil society, and international organizations, ensuring survivors non-discriminatory and comprehensive access to essential services, including sexual and reproductive health care and mental health services, as well as access to gender-responsive justice, is crucial. Ukraine remains committed to working closely with all stakeholders. I would like to invite the group to visit our survivors' relief centers established in partnership with the UNFPA. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Irina Mudra for her statement, and I'll give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Katuna Totladze, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Georgia.
Mr. President, at the outset, we would like to thank the Presidency of Brazil for convening today's open debate, as well as all the briefers for their valuable contributions. Georgia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. The sustainable peace cannot be achieved without women's full, equal, and meaningful participation at all levels of decision-making. While gender parity in peace and security dimensions globally is yet to be achieved, we welcome women's increasing participation in areas pertaining to international peace and security. Despite the progress, implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda remains too slow, and accelerated efforts are needed in accordance with the landmark resolution 1325 and subsequent resolutions. Ensuring the meaningful engagement of women in the peace process is a high priority for the government of Georgia. We're actively pursuing the policy of promoting the issues related to the needs of the conflict-affected women as envisaged in the most recent Fourth National Action Plan for the implementation of the UN Resolution on Women, Peace and Security. The latest plan, which covers the period of 2022-2024, also envisages integration of a gender perspective into the security sector and decision-making processes, as well as meaningful participation of women in conflict prevention and resolution. In addition, it aims at protecting the rights of conflict-affected women through ensuring their physical, social, and economic security. In this regard, Georgia remains committed to maintain the issues of the conflict-affected women, including the IDPs, on the agenda of Geneva International Discussions, which is the only format of negotiations between Georgia and Russia on the security and humanitarian issues. Stemming from the Russian aggression and occupation of two regions of Georgia, Excellencies, regrettably, despite the efforts of my government to empower conflict-affected women, Russia's ongoing occupation and effective control over Abkhazia and Tskhinvali regions of Georgia that was legally attested by the landmark decision of the European Court of Human Rights on 21st of January 2021 hinders peace process and prevents my government from sharing the human rights protection framework with women remaining on the other side of the occupation line. After 15 years of full-scale military aggression against Georgia and illegal occupation of its Abkhazia and Tskhinvali regions, Russia continues to breach ceasefire agreement of 12th of August 2008. The grave human rights situation in the occupied regions continues causing immense suffering for the conflict-affected people on both sides of the occupation line. Unfortunately, there were several cases of detention of young Georgian women with fictional and absurd charges. Deliberately targeting female citizens of Georgia is a dangerous trend containing a strong gender dimension and aiming to pursue, scare, and humiliate most vulnerable part of ethnic Georgian population in the occupied regions that are already victims of constant discrimination. Given these facts of human rights violations, it's of utmost importance that international and regional human rights monitoring mechanisms are allowed in the occupied regions. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate Georgia's readiness to continue integrating gender perspectives in decision-making, advancement of women's rights, and their meaningful participation in the peace process in line with the UN Security Council resolutions. I thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Katuna Totladze for her statement. And I'll give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Stella Roner Grumbacic, European Union Ambassador for Gender and Diversity.
Thank you. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova and Bosnia-Herzegovina, the potential candidate country Georgia, as well as Andorra, Monaco, and San Marino align themselves with this statement. Mr. President, gender equality is a universal value. Resolution 1325 and subsequent Women, Peace and Security resolutions remind us of our joint commitment to keep women's rights, to keep women's rights and their leadership at the core of security and political decision-making. The world faces alarming security and conflict shifts and geopolitical power competitions. Advanced technology and cyber warfare, as well as climate change, redefine how we think about security. We've witnessed the weaponization of energy, food, migration movements, and information. There are attempts to weaken the rules-based multilateral order. Against this backdrop, women's leadership and their full, equal, and meaningful participation at all levels of decision-making is essential. Our commitment to mainstream a gender perspective in responding effectively to these security threats is ever more important. While the space for civil society is shrinking across the world, women and girls have continued to play a critical role in resolving conflicts, mediation, promoting reconciliation, and fostering stability in their communities and nations. In the scope of today's discussion, allow me to highlight 3 concrete areas of further focus. 1. We should work resolutely towards sustained, predictable, and flexible funding for women's and women-led organizations. Funding cuts and restrictions hinder their financial independence and operational capabilities, and thereby slow down the effective implementation of the WPS agenda. We need to act decisively to end and prevent all forms of violence, harassment, intimidation, threats and reprisals, online and offline, as well as the spread of disinformation designed to discredit and silence women politicians, human rights defenders, peace builders, and civil society activists. That includes reprisals against women who engaged with the UN, in particular with this Council. And thirdly, we should take strong measures to ensure full, equal, and meaningful participation and leadership of women in diverse situations and conditions in political, military and security structures, as well as in peace operations and missions. This must include transforming discriminatory structures and social norms that hinder women's participation. We should also work hard to take away barriers to participation. The EU will apply a coordinated approach to risk mitigation and to the prevention of all forms of sexual and gender-based violence. The EU will also ensure that responses are victim and survivor-centered and trauma-sensitive, including by access to sexual and reproductive health care services, as well as mental health and psychological support. Mr. President, in the EU's strategic approach to WPS, women's participation is a cross-cutting priority that, together with gender mainstreaming, reinforces the implementation of the entire WPS agenda. During the past 3 years, we've increased the share of women amongst international staff in our civilian missions to 28%. We have increased our funding to the EU Human Rights Defenders Mechanism to 30 million euros, and we continue to make the voices of Afghan women of diverse backgrounds heard through the Afghan Women Leaders Forum. In collaboration with all others, the EU will continue to promote women's leadership and participation in peace and security at all levels. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Stella Roner-Grubacic for her statement, and I'll give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Nazria El Afriki, Deputy Permanent Observer of the League of Arab States to the United Nations.
Mr. President, we have no doubt that there are great strides made to promote the role of women and her participation to maintain international peace and security, whether regionally or internationally, among the military and police peacekeeping missions, or as leaders in the United Nations, including in the peacekeeping missions and different political missions. However, there is a lot that can be achieved under your august council, especially with the loss of some gains that were hard-earned in the different institutions. The statistics presented in this domain prove what has been stated. The international community requires further effort and ideas to promote the role of women and her participation in different socio-economic and political domains, whether nationally, regionally, or internationally, especially to maintain international peace and security. And due to the shortness of time, and on behalf of the League of Arab States, we would like to stress some of the 4 proposals that are included in my statement, which will be presented to your august council in full to promote the Women, Peace and Security agenda. This proposal is that the League of Arab States stresses the need to promote the link between the Women, Peace and Security agenda, nationally, regionally, and internationally, to ensure the inalienable rights of women. Thus, we must stress that the barbaric attacks of the Israeli occupation against the rights of women and child in the occupied Palestinian territories do not only affect women in these territories and their ability to participate in peace and security efforts, but on the ability of Palestinian women and children to undertake their roles in socio-economic and political spheres. We have no doubt that the recent barbaric and heinous Israeli war against the innocent, defenseless people of Gaza, their attempt at forcefully displacing people, is an obstacle to regional and international effort to bring about peace in the region and in occupied Palestine. That peace that unfortunately we have failed for 7 decades to achieve. This is not only a grave breach of Resolution 1325 that you have adopted, but also a breach of international law, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law, and all norms that represent the pillars of Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. we believe that there is a need to promote institutional cooperation between the UN and the League of Arab States and continue our effort to implement the 1325 resolution. We believe in the role of women to make peace and sustain it. Thus, the League and its member states have adopted a number of practical plans, including the adoption of many strategies aimed at protecting Arab women and promoting her role. This is applicable in the areas of conflict in the Arab region, the last of which was the establishment of an emergency committee to protect women during conflict in the region, as well as establishing a women network for peace. We're now exchanging experiences and benefiting from similar experiences in cooperation with UN Women and ASQA. To conclude, Mr. President, in recognition of the central role of women in the preventive diplomacy to build, sustain, and maintain peace, and in line with the appropriate role of women in our societies today, we still have hope that our next meeting next year in this chamber, we will be able to stand on what has been achieved by women nationally, regionally, and internationally in line with her determination to become a real, genuine partner to her to men, to bring about peace and security that we have lost, to ensure our world safe and secure away from any conflict and war. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Nasria Ilar Jafrit for her statement. We still have 61 speakers on the list. I wish to remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 4 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We would like to thank Brazil for convening this important annual debate. Mexico references its support to all activist women, defenders of human rights, builders of peace, and leaders of civil society. It supports them and condemns any indiscriminate attack or any attack aimed at the civilian population, especially women and girls, under any circumstance, because it runs contrary to the principle of distinction in keeping with international humanitarian law. Mr. President, peace can only be achieved if it's inclusive, and that's why we promote the full, egalitarian, and meaningful participation of women in peace processes. The Women, Peace and Security agenda has built a sound legal framework with 10 resolutions, and yet women continue to be excluded from decision-taking processes and the process of peace. We are convinced that what's necessary is that this invaluable scaffolding, legal scaffolding, be utilized fully. As affirmed by our Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Alicia Barcena, Mexico does not accept calling into question the progressive nature of international standards in the area of gender equality, which has cost so much to build. In this regard, Mexico is aware of the importance of guaranteeing human rights of women for their reproductive and sexual health, including abortion and body autonomy, as well as the provision of mental health care services and psychosocial support. Mr. President, Mexico was the first developing country to proclaim a feminist foreign policy because we are focused on transforming those structures that prevent the advancement of women and the full enjoyment of their human rights. In my country's recent participation as a member of the Security Council, we promoted efforts geared to implementing this agenda. For example, from the informal group of women experts on peace and security, which we co-chaired with Ireland, we promoted actions for this body to include a transformative approach to gender in its work. And that's why we urge the current and future co-presidents of the informal working group, a group of experts, to continue defending the central nature of gender equality and the scope of human rights for all women and girls, including prevention of sexual and gender-based violence in all international peace and security processes and in all final documents adopted by this Council. We recognize the good practices of this body adopted in recent years, for example, the Declaration of Shared Principles on the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. which some 16 elected members who are entering and leaving assumed as of October 2021, so that during our respective rotated presidencies of the Security Council, we would close the persistent gap between rhetoric and reality, words and deeds. These commitments then contributed to increasing participation of women in civil society, of meetings at this council, and to highlight the cross-cutting nature of the agenda. Mr. President, the UN peacekeeping operations strengthen full, egalitarian, and meaningful participation of women in peace processes. However, we have still not yet achieved the goal of having at least 15% of women in uniform of the total personnel that are deployed. We urge further progress in implementing the gender parity strategy for uniformed personnel for 2028. Mexico has been increasing its participation in peacekeeping operations of the United Nations, and with that, the percentage of women in uniform. Currently, the percentage of Mexican women deployed is of 40%. Moreover, in coordination with the Ibero-American Secretariat, Mexico this year in June promoted the creation of the Ibero-American Network of Mediating Women that promotes substantive participation of women in mediation and the peaceful settlement of disputes in the Ibero-American region. Mr. President, turning to national action plans, these are a key tool to promote internal policies that promote gender equality in the area of security. Mexico's National Action Plan promoted the development of the Women Builders of Peace program, which supports empowerment and leadership of women at the local and state level in the work for peacemaking, prevention, and gender-based violence, and reducing gender-based violence and building peace. We also recognize the contribution of the Covenant on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action established by the Equality Generation Forum, co-chaired by Mexico and France in 2021 for this agenda. Urge continued promotion of synergies in order to ramp up implementation of this on the ground. And finally, Mr. President, we reiterate Mexico's commitment to continue defending human rights and the rights of women and girls in this and all multilateral fora. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Mexico for their statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Brazil for hosting today's important meeting. My gratitude also goes to the Secretary General and the Executive Director of UN Women, as well as all other briefers for their valuable remarks. The Republic of Korea aligns itself with a statement to be delivered by Canada on behalf of the Group of Friends on WPS. Now I would like to deliver the following statement in our national capacity. The Secretary General's report on WPS this year provides another frustrating picture of our current reality. Exclusion, inequality, and misogyny encapsulates the status of women across the world in the report. In Afghanistan, women have been progressively erased from public life through the issuance of over 50 edicts to suppress their rights. In Sudan, widespread sexual violence terrorizes women and girls in Darfur and beyond. To address this reality and fully implement Resolution 1325 on WPS, we must recommit ourselves to this agenda and enhance the Security Council's role. First, the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women should be practice, not rhetoric. As this commences with listening to women's voices and making their perspectives integral to decision-making, we welcome the increased number of women civil society briefers to the Council. As our own efforts, the Republic of Korea has been proudly hosting the annual International Conference on Action with Women and Peace since 2019. We look forward to hearing from diverse women at the upcoming 5th conference on the 30th of November in Seoul. Second, ensuring safe environment for women's participation is imperative. It is alarming that Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights documented incidents of reprisals against 172 women and girls working with the UN in 2022. Furthermore, over 30 women from civil society who addressed the Security Council last year were targeted for reprisals. We condemn all attacks and reprisals against women involved in human rights, humanitarian work, and peace-building activities, especially those who are cooperating with the United Nations. We must ensure their safety through monitoring and reporting, as well as preventive measures, including robust mandates for UN missions to protect and promote women's participation. Last but not least, women peace builders, as well as human rights defenders, should be provided with the necessary resources. We emphasize the importance of ensuring adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for implementation of the WPS agenda. The Republic of Korea has increased its contribution to the Peace Building Fund to over $4.3 million this year. We will consider further increasing our contributions both to implement the WPS agenda as well as to advance peace building. Mr. President, taking full consideration of all these dire needs to support women's participation in all peace processes, the Republic of Korea is proud to announce that it will join the statement of shared commitment on WPS as an incoming member of the Security Council. We will actively integrate the WPS agenda into those of the Council in various contexts, not only during our presidency, but through the entire term of our membership in the Council. We will make our utmost efforts for full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation of women, and look forward to working closely with the other Council members in this regard. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, at the outset, my delegation would like to express our appreciation to Brazil for convening this important debate. Malaysia would also like to thank the briefer for their insights and assessment. Our delegations aligned itself with the statement to be delivered by Vietnam on behalf of ASEAN. Mr. President, the landmark Resolution 1325 reaffirms the significant role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflicts and in peace-building initiatives. It calls upon member states to increase representation of women in all decision-making levels in national, regional, and international institutions. The resolution and other relevant resolutions are evident of the unequivocal trust and confidence that we put in women as agents of change in the maintenance of international peace and security. Today, 23 years after its adoption, it is time that we take stock on the progress and get our priorities straight. Against the backdrop of heightened violence in armed conflict across the region, the regress in global efforts to advance the agenda of women, peace, and security is highly regrettable. It is alarming that despite notable achievement, the progress has been too slow, too narrow, or made easy to reverse. Women continue to be marginalized from peace processes and excluded from decision-making positions. It is unfortunate but unsurprising that this structural exclusion correlates with the prolong of conflict as reported in the UNSCR's report on women, peace, and security. Mr. President, consistent with the goals of Malaysia's national policy on women launched in 1989, efforts have been undertaken to ensure women's participation in the process of decision-making at all levels in Malaysia. The formulation of Malaysia's national policies take into account gender perspective in the process of furthering our domestic and global peace and security. This also serves as a basis of the deployment of 868 Malaysian Armed Forces and Royal Malaysia Police to 5 UN peacekeeping operations. 96 of them are female. There's a pressing need for more women to be included in peace processes, as their qualities of compassion and empathic listening are invaluable assets in addressing issues like gender-based crimes and conflict-related sexual violence in armed conflict. As a member of ASEAN, Malaysia fully endorsed the ASEAN Joint Statement on Promoting Women, Peace and Security adopted in November 2017. The ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on WPS subsequently launched in 2021 is a further testament to our commitment in advancing the implementation of the WPS agenda to promote sustainable peace and security for all citizens in the region. Mr. President, Malaysia has women leaders at all multiple disciplines of peace and security, among others our Chief of Justice, parliamentarians, top diplomats, peacekeepers, and security forces. Fortified with courage and resilience, these inspiring ladies broke through the glass ceilings through ambition and competence. Going forward, we will continue to ensure that women continue to play a key role in Malaysia's engagement towards maintaining international peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malaysia for their statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Romania.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to add a few points in addition to the statement made by the European Union, but also to the statement of the Group of Friends of Women, Peace and Security. Romania welcomes the most recent report of the Secretary General, as well as the recommendations it contains. The negative trends in the report are alarming. We are now in the first day of the 79th year since the UN exists. We just celebrated yesterday the UN Day. On such a momentous occasion, an appalling number of 640 million women and girls are living in conflict-affected countries in 2022. And this is 50% higher than 5 years ago. And it's obviously that we need to do more to avoid a complete failure, especially as we approach 2025, which is a milestone moment for the 25th anniversary of the WPS agenda and the celebration of the 30 years since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration of the Platform for Action. Conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence, threats and attacks against women and girls remain on the rise in so many areas across the world, including in neighboring Ukraine. And we will continue to call for holding perpetrators accountable and for survivors to be provided with support for integration. Mr. President, gender equality and empowerment of women and girls are key pillars of the WPS agenda. To that end, women should be guaranteed a meaningful participation and leadership positions during peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peacebuilding. A success story in this regard is women's representation in the frontline negotiation teams during the peace negotiations in Colombia. We need to echo these stories of women meaningful and genuine participation on peacebuilding in other geographical ecosystems, from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Sudan and South Sudan, as well as in Central African Republic, Somalia, and Mali. Likewise, we need to encourage local ownership and protecting women, civil society. Excluding women from societal and political arenas or denying them access to justice, as it happens under the Taliban rule, is not the way forward. Mr. President, promotion and protection of women's rights is a constant of our foreign policy and the priority of our membership to the Human Rights Council. My government, the Romanian government, took important steps to implement the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on WPS. A first national strategy and national action plan was adopted 3 years ago in 2020, and the Ministry of National Defense is currently drafting a second updated version for 2024-2028. And Romania took important institutional measures in support of women's participation and representation in the defense and security sectors, including a decision-making level. Romania and the United States are the current chairs of the global network of national focal points for WPS, comprising 100 members. Our foreign minister, who I'm happy to say it is Madame Foreign Minister, co-chaired the ministerial debate during the last high-level week. Finally, Mr. President, as part of the ongoing efforts, member countries of the network are invited to take part in the International Conference of the Global Network to be held in Bucharest in just about 2 weeks' time, on the 7th to the 9th of November 2023. The event that we will be hosting will be a new opportunity to improve coordination between member states and regional organizations and strengthen the implementation of the WPS agenda. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Romania for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Croatia.
Mr. President, I thank the Brazil's presidency for organizing this debate and the distinguished briefers for sharing their valuable insights. Croatia aligns itself with the statements of the European Union and Group of Friends of Women, Peace and Security. I would also like to add some remarks in my national capacity. 23 years ago, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 recognized the unique role of women in war and peace, urging member states to ensure women's increased representation at all levels of decision-making, including in prevention and resolution of conflicts. There were some successes in implementation of 1325. However, nowadays we are facing negative trends. Global security is declining, disrespect for international humanitarian law is growing, and women's rights and gender equality are under increasing threat. We need to improve global security and respect for international humanitarian and human rights law, and we need a stronger role of women to achieve it. Croatia's experience clearly demonstrates that women not only bear an immense burden during conflict, but also have a crucial role in preventing, management and resolution of conflicts. We are fully committed to promoting and implementing women, peace and security agenda as outlined in our second National Action Plan currently in place. Mr. President, we call on all states to uphold landmark Resolution 1325 and follow-on resolutions and align their laws with the UN CEDAW Convention and CEDAW Committee General Recommendation 30 on Women, Peace and Security. They represent powerful tools at our disposal to safeguard women's rights and strengthen their participation and leadership in war and peace. Croatia, as PBC chair, prioritizes the role of women in peace building and sustaining peace. We invite all member states to support sufficient and predictable financing of PBF and its gender-sensitive programs. We also emphasize the importance of continuous cooperation with our civil society partners, who must be systematically included in the implementation of 1325 agenda and other conflict prevention and women empowering activities. Finally, the new agenda for peace and women, peace and security are compatible agendas. And when preparing for the summit of the future, we should bring them together, having in mind that women's rights are human rights in war and peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Croatia for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
Thank you, President. As agreed, I'm pleased to deliver two statements today. The second is Canada's, and the first is on behalf of 67 member states of the Group of Friends of Women, Peace and Security, representing all 5 regional groups of the UN and the European Union. We recognize the determination of all women and girls in diverse conditions and situations who are building peace and preventing conflict, and we emphasize 5 points. First, we urge all member states and the UN system to redouble our efforts to protect and promote women's human rights and ensure their full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation and leadership in all aspects of peace and security. We must raise the level of ambition with regard to peace processes at all stages, with the target of 50%. The UN should ensure that women's participation is a standard requirement in all peace processes it supports. Second, we must dismantle the patriarchy and oppressive power structures that stand in the way of progress on gender equality and women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in political and public life. Third, we must create safe, secure, and enabling environments, both off and online, for all peace builders, peacekeepers, human rights and environmental defenders, civil society leaders, journalists, media workers, advocates for gender equality, and others to carry out their essential work. This includes strongly condemning gender-based violence that occurs through or is amplified by technology, and attacks, intimidation, retaliation, and reprisals against women peace builders and human rights defenders and advocates for gender equality, especially those who cooperate with the UN. Member states in the UN system must concretely support the work of women peace builders and human rights defenders and take all necessary steps to prevent attacks and protect those at risk. And we must promote predictable, sustained, and flexible funding for peace building by local women's organizations' rights and networks. Fourth, we call for the full respect of international law and the prevention and response to all forms of sexual and gender-based violence and discrimination, on and offline. This requires putting victims and survivors at the heart of all efforts. It means ensuring their non-discriminatory, comprehensive access to essential services, including sexual and reproductive health care services and mental health and psychosocial services, as well as to gender-responsive justice. Where national institutions are not able or willing to act against perpetrators, we should deter such crimes with all the tools at our disposal, including by referring matters to the International Criminal Court. The Security Council has shown that it can use targeted sanctions against those who perpetrate and direct sexual and gender-based violence in armed conflict, and we encourage it to take such action. Finally, we encourage the continued development, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of national and regional action plans, together, of course, with women peace builders. President, I will now briefly address the Council on behalf of Canada. Perhaps like many others around this table today, when we started preparing our national statement, we looked at the one we made last year, and the year before, and the year before. And we were struck by how almost all of the text would be equally relevant today. I fear how far back we could go in years and continue to find usable material. References to growing threats against women peace builders, calls for more consistent implementation, even specific calls to recognize and resource the leadership of Afghan, Haitian, Israeli, Palestinian, South Sudanese, Sudanese, and other women working for peace, including Indigenous women in Canada and around the world. Yet while many of the words we're using could be the same, this moment feels different. It feels especially raw and fearsome, as though so much work done by so many to center humanity, to strengthen institutions, and ultimately to build peace is being lost more and more each day. More than ever, the women, peace, and security agenda can be pivotal. This means heeding women's peace builders' calls. It means building new partnerships across traditional divides, silos, and geopolitical blocks based on outdated power dynamics. And recognizing that the value that can best define how, quote, like-minded we are should be the desire for all people to live in peace with dignity and agency.
This means recognizing the lack of funding that women are facing, women who work to build peace and women's organizations, and to work to bridge this gap, in particular by ensuring adequate, predictable, and sustainable funding. For Canada, this also means that we need to continue considering with humility our actions abroad as well as at home.
We hope that we can all be in search of new text for this debate next year. Merci.
I thank the representative of Canada for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Nordic countries, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Denmark. We thank Brazil for convening this important debate, and thank you also to our insightful briefers for their remarks. In a time shaped by the proliferation of armed conflict, we must redouble our efforts to implement Resolution 1325. This is necessary if we are to achieve the 2030 Agenda and succeed in meeting the ambitions of the Secretary-General's new Agenda for Peace. Excellencies, the full framework of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is robust and extensive. However, progress on implementation is unacceptably slow. The report by the Secretary-General is clear. A majority of peace processes continue to take place with no women as mediators, negotiators, or signatories. Women human rights defenders and peace builders continue to be exposed to violence, including sexual and gender-based violence, harassment, reprisals, threats and intimidation, offline as well as online. Women's rights organizations remain critically underfunded. It is evident that the full, equal and meaningful participation of women at all levels in political and peace-building processes, as well as in peacekeeping, is essential to lasting peace and security. In this regard, we draw attention to the open letter of 16 October signed by 617 civil society organizations and echo its call to support the full, equal, meaningful and safe participation and leadership of women. History has taught us that inclusive peace processes are more likely to produce sustainable results. Across the globe, women have successfully contributed to more robust democracies and longer-lasting peace. Positive political change and development is in high demand, and women must be in the driving seat. Allow us to highlight 3 lines of effort. First, local women-led groups play an indispensable role in preventing conflicts and building peace in communities, fostering dialogue and responding to crisis. As put forward in the Secretary General's report, local mediation can be a key entry point for women's participation in peacemaking when high-level negotiations are deadlocked. We must do more to ensure that these groups can participate meaningfully in all political processes, including Track 1, not least by providing flexible funding, for example through mechanisms such as the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, access to capacity building and protection against reprisals, and equally important, to exert political pressure when women are excluded. Second, the UN must take concrete steps towards greater diversity and representation of women, including young women, in the mediation terms it leads or co-leads. The UN must set and lead by example to achieve a fundamental normative and practical shift. Women's full, equal, and meaningful participation is ultimately about breaking power structures and sustaining peace. Finally, and third, it is the responsibility of member states, with support from the UN, to address all cases of violence, harassment, intimidation, and threats, both offline and online, against women, peace builders, and human rights defenders. The Nordic countries emphasize a zero tolerance for such harassments and the need for strengthened accountability mechanisms in this regard, and reaffirmed the Secretary General's call to dismantle oppressive power structures which stand in the way of progress on gender equality or women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in political and public life. The Nordic countries remain committed to work with partners, including women's and feminist organizations, to advance the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the ASEAN. Mr. President, ASEAN reaffirms that women empowering is not only a matter of moral imperative, but also strategic necessity. Failing to harness the full potential of women not just impedes the progress and security of more than half of the world population, it hampers our collective progress and security. Women are not merely statistics in conflict data. Women are the effective peacemakers, agents of change, and architects of reconciliation. Their absence is not an oversight, but a critical flaw. Despite the existence of the robust frameworks, discriminatory gender norms continue to pervade societies globally, and women remain absent from, or at least significantly underrepresented in peace negotiations and political decision-making processes. Moreover, conflict disproportionately subject women and girls to sexual violence, displacement, and hinder access to justice. The realization of the WPS agenda demands an unwavering commitment across multiple societal strata. Adequate resources must be channeled to empower women for leadership roles, and existing laws and policies should be rigorously enforced. The dismantling of entrenched social and cultural barriers is essential and achieved through targeted education and awareness campaigns. The role of political will in this context cannot be overstated enough. Mr. President, implementing the WPS agenda has long been recognized and as essential to achieving sustainable peace and prosperity in the ASEAN region. ASEAN is committed to ensuring the gender equality and the full protection of women's rights. We also remain steadfast in our objectives to maintain regional peace, address shared security concerns, and advance development and prosperity for all citizens. The WPS agenda in ASEAN is guided by the commitments to implement the Resolution 1325 and other related resolutions on women, peace, and security. Since the adoption of the 2017 joint statement on promoting women and peace and security, ASEAN has achieved important results in implementing the WPS agenda through concerted multi-sectoral efforts and partnerships. The ASEAN Women for Peace Registry was established in 2018 as a creative initiative to mobilize resources and consolidate knowledge for capacity building and advocacy on the gendered approach to peace and conflict in the region. Aligning efforts of the ASEAN Committee on Women, the ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of the Women and Children, and the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation have been pivotal to ASEAN's collective action in mainstreaming women's rights and gender equality in peace and security. The ASEAN defense sector is actively dedicated to translating the WPS agenda into actionable collaboration. ASEAN Women